The wind was a thief in this God's-forsaken land. It stole the warmth from a body, the moisture from the soil, and the hope from a heart, leaving behind only a fine grit of dust that settled in the lines of a face and the folds of a soul. Alara felt it in her bones, this constant, wearying theft. Her world had shrunk to the four walls of the sod house, its packed earth sides a poor defense against the ceaseless howl of the plains. Outside, the sky was a vast, bleached canvas, indifferent and cruel. Inside, the silence was worse. It was a weighted blanket, heavy with the things her husband, Alistair, never said. He had been a man of promises in the soft, green hills of the east, his words like polished stones. Here, the sun had baked them brittle until they crumbled to dust, just like everything else. His charm had curdled into a sullen resentment that followed her from room to room. He looked at her not as a wife, but as another failed investment, another testament to his miscalculations. The land had broken him, and in turn he was breaking her. Each night, she lay beside him, a chasm of cold linen between them, and prayed for a rain that never came, for a word that was never spoken, for a morning that felt different. This morning was different. The silence that greeted her was absolute, a profound void where the usual sounds of Alistair's restless stirring should have been. Her eyes opened to the pale gray light filtering through the single grimy window. The air was still, too still. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. She sat up, the rough blanket scratching her skin. His side of the cornhusk mattress was empty, the indentation already cooling. A pewter hip flask, his constant companion, lay on its side on the floor, a dark stain spreading slowly into the wood. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the morning haze. Alistair. Her voice was a dry whisper, swallowed by the quiet. She pushed herself from the bed, her bare feet meeting the cold, splintered floorboards. The main room was empty. The hearth was cold, a mound of gray ash. His boots were gone. His coat was gone from its peg by the door. But it was the sight on the small, scarred table that made her breath catch, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. His heavy silver watch, the one he prized above all else, lay next to a folded piece of paper. Beside it, a worn leather pouch, heavy with the unfamiliar weight of coin. Her hands trembled as she reached for the note. Alistair's script was a careless scrawl, the words blunt and brutal. The deed is his. The debt is paid. Do not follow. The deed to this miserable patch of dirt, to this sod house that was more tomb than home. The word hung in the air, a question mark forged of dread. Whose? Her gaze drifted from the note to the open doorway. And there he was. A man she had never seen before stood framed against the unforgiving morning light, a silhouette of quiet possession. He was tall and broad, his shape defined by the worn lines of his duster and the wide brim of his hat, which shadowed his face in mystery. He did not move, did not speak. He simply stood there, an anchor dropped in the center of her capsized world. He was the answer to the question she was too terrified to ask. The debt. Alistair's debts had always been a shadowy specter, but now the specter had a face she could not see, a form that blocked out the sun. She was the collateral. She was the final payment. The note did not say the house was his. It said the deed was his. She understood with a clarity that was like a physical blow. The deed, the house, the land, and its contents. She had been bartered away in the night, a piece of property traded to settle a score. The air left her lungs in a soundless gasp, the cold floor seeming to fall away beneath her feet as the silent man in the doorway watched her world, and her life, dissolve into ash. Days bled into one another, each dawn a new wave of the same paralyzing fear. The man, he had not offered a name, and she could not bring herself to ask for one, moved with a silent, unnerving purpose. He was a creature of the blighted landscape, his skin weathered like old leather, his movements economical and deliberate. He never entered the house past the main room, never crossed the invisible threshold into her sleeping quarters, but his presence was a constant, looming fact. He was the owner of the ground beneath her feet, the air she breathed. She watched him from the window, her prison and her perch. He worked from sunup to sundown with a tireless rhythm that shamed Alistair's memory. He mended the sagging fence Alistair had cursed and abandoned. He cleared the stones from the pathetic patch of earth meant for a garden, his shoulders straining with an effort she had never witnessed in her husband. He retarred the leaky roof, the rhythmic tap of his hammer a steady, unnerving heartbeat against the silence. He was restoring the place, breathing life back into the very thing that had suffocated her. It was a bitter irony. Each morning, she would find a bucket of fresh water from the well by the door, the rope no longer frayed. In the evening, a brace of rabbits or a piece of salted meat would appear on the table, left there while she huddled in the other room. He never spoke. He never demanded. He provided, as if she were just another part of the homestead to be maintained. Like the drafty walls or the weary-looking horse, he tended with a quiet, gentle hand. That gentleness was the most confusing part. It did not fit the terrifying narrative she had constructed in her mind. He was her jailer, her owner, yet his hands knew how to be soft. Fear was a stubborn companion, but slowly, another feeling began to take root in the barren soil of her heart. A profound and unsettling curiosity. She started to notice details. The way his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, would scan the horizon, not with the panicked desperation of Alistair, but with a patient, knowing gaze. He carried himself not as a conqueror, but as someone who understood the land, who had made a harsh peace with it. He was not fighting it, he was coexisting with it. One afternoon, a sudden violent storm rolled in, the sky turning a bruised purple. The wind tore at the small house, and rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. The roof, which had dripped miserably in past rains, held firm. Through the window, she saw him struggling to secure a loose shutter on the small barn, the wind whipping his duster around him. A powerful gust ripped the wooden shutter from his grasp, sending it flying. Without hesitation, he used his own body as a shield, pressing his back against the opening to protect the meager stores of feed inside. He stood there for the better part of an hour, drenched and unmoving, a bulwark against the fury of the storm. Something shifted in her then. It was not trust, not yet. It was a flicker of recognition. She saw not a monster, but a man enduring, a man protecting. When the storm passed, leaving the air clean and smelling of wet earth, he came back toward the house, limping slightly. He paused at the door, pulling off his soaked hat and running a hand through his dark, damp hair. For the first time, he looked directly at her through the window. His gaze was not demanding, not threatening. It was simply seeing her. Her heart stuttered. On impulse, driven by an instinct she did not understand, she unbolted the door and opened it a crack. The scent of rain and damp wool filled the small space between them. His gray eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Your leg," she said, her voice rough from disuse. It was the first word she had spoken to him. He glanced down as if just remembering the injury. "It's nothing." His voice was low and gravelly, like stones shifting at the bottom of a riverbed. It should be cleaned." The words felt foreign in her mouth, a clumsy offering. He held her gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken history and the fresh, clean air of the storm's aftermath. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He did not move to enter, but waited for her permission. With a trembling hand, she opened the door wider. It felt less like a surrender and more like a choice, the first one she had made in a lifetime. The return of Alistair was as sudden and unwelcome as a rattlesnake in the larder. He did not come alone. 2 other men, rough-faced and carrying the same air of cheap cruelty as her husband, rode with him. They reined their horses in before the house, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled on the newly repaired fence. Elara saw them from the window, and the fragile peace of the past weeks shattered into 1,000 pieces of ice in her veins. Silas. He had told her his name was Silas. One quiet evening over a shared meal of roasted rabbit, was by the corral, mending a leather strap. He looked up, his body going still. He had seen them. He straightened slowly, his movements calm, but a coiled tension radiated from him. He was not a man easily startled. Alistair swung down from his horse, his face flushed with whiskey and indignation. He strode toward the house, his eyes raking over the neatened yard, the solid roof, the tended garden patch. A sneer twisted his lips. "Well, well," he called out, his voice loud and proprietary. "Looks like my investment is paying off. Did a fine job fixing up my place." Silas walked to meet him, positioning himself between Alistair and the front door. He was a wall of quiet granite. "It's not your place, Alistair." "I have the bill of sale for her," Alistair spat, gesturing contemptuously toward the house, toward Alara. "The land was yours, a bad debt, but she is my wife, my property. I've come to collect what is mine." Alara's blood ran cold. Property. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had been property to be neglected, property to be traded, and now property to be reclaimed. From inside the house, she watched the confrontation, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The fear was there, a familiar, sickening taste, but underneath it something else was burning. A low, steady fire that Silas's quiet dignity had kindled. The fire of defiance. Alistair took a step forward. "Get out of my way, drifter." "No," Silas said. The word was flat, immovable. "She belongs to me," Alistair shrieked, his voice cracking with fury. He lunged, not at Silas, but toward the door, his face a mask of ownership and rage. In that moment, Alara moved. She flung the door open and stepped out onto the porch, planting her feet on the solid wood. The sun was hot on her face. The air tasted of dust and danger. Alistair stopped short, surprised to see her standing there, not cowering inside. "I am not your property," she said. Her voice shook, but it was clear and carried in the tense silence. It was the truest thing she had ever said. Her eyes met Alistair's, and for the first time, he saw not a timid mouse, but a woman looking back at him. His shock curdled back into rage. "You ungrateful bitch! After everything He never finished the sentence. Silas moved with a speed that was startling, grabbing Alistair's arm in a grip of iron. The two other men, seeing their employer manhandled, started to dismount. But Silas's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. "Stay on your horses." There was no threat in his tone, only absolute certainty. The men froze. The confrontation was not theirs. It was between the two men, and more importantly, it was about the woman standing on the porch, claiming her own existence. Alistair struggled, but he was like a child in Silas's grasp. "You have no right." "He has the right I have given him," Alara said, her voice stronger now. She took another step forward, standing beside Silas, a partner in this defiance, not a prize to be won. "You sold me. You abandoned me. I belong to no one. But I will not belong to you." The fight was pathetically brief. Silas shoved Alistair back with such force that he stumbled and fell into the dust. He looked up, humiliated and defeated, at the two figures standing together against him. Silas, the quiet protector, and Alara, the woman he had discarded, now looking down at him with an expression he did not recognize. It was not fear. It was not even hatred. It was dismissal. He had been erased. With a final, sputtered curse, Alistair scrambled to his feet, hauled himself onto his horse, and fled with his companions, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of shame and the settling dust. The dust settled, and a new kind of silence descended. It was not the oppressive silence of fear or the charged silence of confrontation, but a quiet born of resolution. It was a silence that held the promise of peace. Alara stood on the porch, her body still trembling with the adrenaline of her defiance, watching the horizon long after Alistair had disappeared. The world felt wider, the sky less cruel. Silas came to stand beside her. He had a shallow cut on his cheekbone where one of Alistair's flailing hands had caught him. Without thinking, Alara reached up, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the wound. He flinched almost imperceptibly at her touch, not from pain, but from surprise. His stormy gray eyes met hers, and in their depths, she saw a flicker of something raw and vulnerable. It was a look of profound respect. He had not fought for a piece of property. He had stood for a person. He had held the line so that she could find her own voice. "Thank you," she whispered, her hand dropping back to her side. He simply nodded, his gaze returning to the vast, empty plains. He won't be back. That night, she did not retreat to her room immediately. They sat at the small table, the lamp casting a warm, golden glow, and shared a meal of bread and jerky. There were no grand declarations, no promises made. There was only a shared space, an easy quiet that felt more intimate than any conversation she had ever had with Alistair. For the first time, the house did not feel like a cage. Felt like a sanctuary, a home. She woke the next morning to the smell of coffee and the soft light of dawn. The air was cool and clean. The knot of fear that had lived in her stomach for so long was gone, replaced by a strange, buoyant lightness. She dressed and walked outside. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. The land, once her enemy, seemed to stretch before her now not as a threat, but as an expanse of possibility. Silas was by the corral, stroking the neck of his horse. He looked up as she approached, a small, almost smile touching his lips. He watched her as she breathed in the morning air, her face turned toward the light, her shoulders relaxed for the first time. She was no longer the haunted, terrified woman he had found here. She was transformed, forged anew in the crucible of hardship and choice. He walked over to her, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped before her, his presence a comfort now, not a threat. He gently reached out, not to grab or possess, but his fingers lightly brushed her arm, a gesture of quiet affirmation. He looked into her eyes, and his own were clear and deep. "You're free now," he said, his voice low and certain. The words were not a gift he was giving her, but a truth he was acknowledging. Freedom wasn't something he had bestowed. It was something she had seized. It was hers. A tear, not of sorrow but of profound release, traced a path through the fine dust on her cheek. She did not wipe it away. She looked past him, at the endless horizon, at the rising sun, and for the first time in a life she could remember, she felt its warmth.